Wenna had spent 11 years making certain that no one in the Iron Kettle ever truly heard her speak. She broke that vow in a single breath, and she broke it to correct the grammar of the most dangerous man in Drava. She would replay the moment for the rest of her life, and she would never be able to say, not to Marin, not to the king, not even to herself, in the honest dark before sleep, why she did it. The tavern had gone wrong the instant the door opened. She felt it before she understood it, the way you feel a stare that isn't there. Lomere was a border town, the last honest roof before the wards, and the Iron Kettle saw its share of hard men. Trappers with frost still in their beards, deserters who paid in foreign coin and did not meet your eyes. The occasional tax rider gone sour on his own errand, drinking away the guilt of what he'd collected. Wenna had learned to read a room the way other girls her age had learned to read letters, which was to say, completely, and without ever being taught. She knew the difference between a fight about to start and a fight already lost. She knew which silences were tired and which were coiled. So when the cold came in through the door with the 6 hooded riders, before a single one of them spoke, before their boots had even finished crossing the threshold, the fine hairs on her arms rose, and something old and buried and wordless in her chest whispered the only lullaby it had ever known. Stay down, be no one. Asterisk, she kept pouring. That was the whole trick of it. The trick 11 years had taught her. You did not stop. You did not look up. You did not do the frightened rabbit thing of freezing. Because freezing is how the wolf finds you. You became furniture. You became a water stain on the wall that the eye slides over on its way to something worth seeing. She moved between the tables with her eyes lowered and her shoulders rounded and her steps small, a plain girl in a plain apron carrying plain ale, forgettable as the smell of the place. The riders took the long table by the fire, without asking anyone's leave, and the whole room rearranged itself around them the way a body flinches from a coming storm. Old Perrin, who had held that table every night for 9 years and once ran a man out the door for looking at it wrong, simply picked up his cup and moved. That told Wenna more than the hoods did. It was the way the others moved that told her which of the 6 was the one that mattered. Grown men. Men who had brawled over card games and laughed about it after, went quiet and small in their seats. A trapper by the window crossed to the far wall and stood there studying his own hands as though he'd never seen them before. The barkeep, Dell, who feared nothing that could be hit, developed a sudden and total fascination with a clean spot on the counter. And the tall one at the center of the table reached up and pushed back his hood. And Wenna, carrying a tray she could no longer feel the weight of, finally understood, with a slow, sick lurch, that the king had walked into the Iron Kettle. She had never seen him. Nobody in Lomere had. Kings did not ride to the ragged edge of their own dying maps. But there was no mistaking what he was. Kalis Farn filled the chair the way winter fills a valley, not by moving into it, but by making everything else colder for his being there. He was younger than the stories had made him, and harder, with a jaw like a struck anvil, and gray eyes that moved across the room slow and even, pricing every soul in it, weighing what each one might cost him, and finding the sum small. His stillness was the worst part. Loud men you could plan around. This one held himself with the terrible economy of something that had never once in its life needed to hurry, because whatever it wanted, it caught. An alpha in a room of ordinary men is a wolf loose in a pen of sheep, and every animal instinct Wenna owned was standing straight up and screaming at her to set the tray down gently, walk out the back through the kitchen, and keep walking into the border dark, until it swallowed her, because the dark was a kinder thing than what sat by the fire. Instead, she brought them their ale, because that was her job, because Dell would take the loss out of her wages. And because, above all, a girl who fled would be remembered, and being remembered was the one death Marin had taught her to fear above all the others. She was leaning across the table to set the last cup down when the king spoke. Not to her, past her as though she were the furniture she had worked so hard to become, to the sharp-faced man at his right hand, in a voice pitched low and amused and entirely certain that no one at that table but the two of them could possibly understand it. He spoke in the old tongue. Wenna's whole body turned to glass. She did not spill the cup. 11 years held her hand steady, even as the floor dropped out of the world. Nobody spoke the old tongue. It was dead. It had been dead longer than Lomir had stood, longer than the wards, the buried language of a buried people, a thing scholars argued over in dusty capitol rooms and pretended to sound out from crumbling slate they could not truly read. She had been told over and over in the dark by the one person who had ever loved her that if she ever heard the old tongue in the mouth of a stranger, she was to make her face slack and stupid and walk the other way as though the sounds were only weather. But she heard it. She heard every single word, and each one landed in her like a key, turning in a lock she had spent her whole life pretending she did not have. Asterisk, look at this one, asterisk, the king murmured, tipping his cup a lazy inch toward her without so much as a glance, the ancient words rolling off his tongue, smooth and cold as poured oil. Asterisk, a mouse in an apron, pouring for wolves. Ask her name, and she'll forget her own name. This is what we ride to the edge of the world to keep breathing. Mice. Who will go on being silent long after the silence has taken their tongues for good, and never know the difference. Asterisk. The man beside him, the beta, huffed a short laugh into his ale. And Winna, who had been silent for 11 years, who had been safe, asterisk, for 11 years, safe as a stone at the bottom of a well, felt something crack clean and cold straight down the middle of her. And up out of the crack, before she could stop it, before she even knew it was coming, came her mother's language. And it came out perfect. Asterisk, a mouse hears the whole house. Asterisk, she said, in the old tongue, in an accent none of them had ever heard in their lives. Because there was no one left alive who could have taught it. Asterisk, and your majesty has used the low form of the word for wolf, which is properly the form for a dog. If you mean to insult the girl who brings your drink, do it in the right dialect. The girl is listening. Asterisk. The tavern did not go quiet. The tavern asterisk stopped. The way a heart stops. The beta's cup froze halfway to his open mouth. Somewhere behind the bar, a jug slipped from a nerveless hand and did not shatter. She heard it land soft on a sack of meal, the loudest small sound in the whole cold world, and the king's head came up slowly. So slowly, like a mountain deciding to turn and look at you, and for the first time since he had ducked through that door, those flat gray eyes stopped pricing the room and fixed, whole and total, on one single thing in it, her. Wenna stood there with an empty tray hugged to her chest like a shield made of tin, and understood, with a calm so complete it would terrify her only much later, that she had just done the one thing she had been forbidden to do since before she was old enough to remember being forbidden it. She had let herself be heard. She had opened her mouth, and out of it had come the sound of every lock in the world turning at once. Asterisk, run. Asterisk, said the old voice, the one that had kept her breathing this long. Asterisk, run now, girl, and do not stop. Asterisk, but the king was already leaning forward, both forearms coming down onto the scarred table. And when his voice came, it was very quiet and very gentle, and it was in the plain speech now, the common tongue, so that every soul in the room would understand precisely how far the world had just tilted off its edge. Say that again, said Caelisvarn. She did not. Bar the door, the king said, never once looking away from her, and did not raise his voice at all, because men like him never had to. 6 chairs scraped back from the table at once. 11 years earlier, Marin had found her on the wrong side of the wards. That was all Wenna had ever been given of her own beginning, and she'd had to steal even that much. Piece it together, from the edges of things the old woman let slip, and then regretted. A child of perhaps 6 winters, mute and blue-lipped with a cold that had nothing to do with the season, standing alone at the tree line where the border dark began. Nothing living walked out of that dark. Everyone in Lomere knew it, the way they knew fire was hot. And Marin, who had buried 3 husbands and never once let a soul catch her weeping over any of them, had looked at that impossible child standing where no child could be, and set down her lantern, and walked into the exact place that killed people, and carried her back out. Wenna had asked her once, why? Why walk into the thing that eats the world for a stranger's foundling? Marin had looked at her a long moment and said, only because you were there to be carried, and would not speak of it again. You didn't speak. For a whole season, the old woman told her later, the single time she ever spoke of the finding, both of them up to their elbows in bread dough, at an hour of the morning that had no proper name. Not one word. I thought maybe the dark had taken your voice the way it takes theirs. Then one night you did speak, in your sleep. And it wasn't any tongue I'd ever heard in 60 years of living.
And I put my hand over your mouth, girl, gentle as I knew how.
And I woke you, and I told you a thing. You are going to keep hearing from me until I am in the ground. Marin's flower-pale hands had gone, still in the dough. There are words in this world that are keys, and there are locks that should never ever be turned. You were born with a mouth full of keys, and you don't even know which doors they fit. So you keep that mouth shut, and you stay alive, and you let the doors stay locked. She had kept it shut. She had built an entire self out of keeping it shut, the way another child might build a life out of a craft or a faith. The lowered eyes, the rounded shoulders, the small, quiet steps, the plainness she wore over her real face like a second and better apron. And through the long, dark years when the wards guttered low, and a village a day's walk upstream went quiet, not burned, not raided, just asterisks, quiet, asterisk. Every man and woman and child in it found days later sitting calm in their own houses with the doors standing open and no words left in them at all, no memory even of their own names. Wenna had kept her mouth shut. She had helped Marin bar the shutters and salt the threshold, and she had told herself, lying awake, that the silence was only a story the border told, to keep children close to home. But she had known the words in the king's mouth, known them the way you know your own heartbeat, without ever having been taught to find it. And now she sat in the back storeroom of the Iron Kettle, on an upturned barrel that smelled of old ale, surrounded by hung bunches of drying herbs and the sharp green ghost of every summer the place had ever seen, and the sharp-faced Beta stood filling the doorway, watching her the way a careful man watches a fire he has not yet decided is safe to turn his back on. "Ossian," he said at last, when the silence had stretched thin enough to fray. "The king's Beta. And whatever you are, girl, you are not a mouse." "I'm a serving girl," Wenna said to the floor, to her own worn shoes. "A serving girl, at the edge of a dying kingdom, who speaks the true living dialect of a language that has been dead in every mouth in the world for 200 years. Ossian crouched slow and unthreatening until his eyes were level with her lowered ones, and there was nothing cruel anywhere in his face, which she found somehow far worse than cruelty would have been. "Let me tell you how rare the thing you just did is. Our lore master can read the old tongue, badly, with a finger under every line and a headache after. The king can speak it, because it is beaten into every varn air from the cradle. For reasons I will wager my sword you are about to learn. But no one, girl, no one, living, can answer it." He tilted his head a careful degree, so. Where did a foundling in a border tavern learn to answer the dead? Say nothing, be no one. Down, stay down, I don't know what I said, Wenna tried, and heard how thin it came out. I heard it in a song once from a traveler, I only repeated the sounds. I don't. You corrected his grammar, Ossian said, not unkindly, just closing the door on the lie, gently the way you'd close a door on a draft. Her mouth shut. Through the storeroom wall, she could hear the low, steady rumble of the king's voice out in the empty tavern, and Marin's voice answering it, and something in the shape of Marin's tone that Wenna had never once heard in 11 years, and had not known the old woman's body could even contain. Fear. Not the bright, quick fear of a woman with a threat at her door. The deep, gray, bone-tired fear of a woman whose worst possible day has finally walked in out of the cold after a very long time spent hoping it had lost the road. Then Marin was in the doorway, and her weathered face had gone the color of ash and old snow, and she crossed the little room in 3 steps, and took Wenna's face in both her rough, cracked hands, the way she had not done since Wenna was small enough to lift. "They're taking you to Viarn Keep, at first light," Marin said, "and I cannot stop it. Heaven forgive me, and I have wondered these last minutes whether I even should." Her thumbs pressed hard against Wenna's cheekbones, as if she could hold the girl's face together by will alone. "So you listen to me now, the way you never do when it costs you nothing. They will stand you before their stones and their rotting books, and they will ask you to speak. Asterisk, do you understand me? First they will ask, then they will beg, then, when they are frightened enough, they will threaten. And the whole shining weight of that dying kingdom is going to come down and hang on your one small voice. Marin, whatever they promise you," the old woman said. And then she did a thing she had never done in all of Wenna's living memory. She dropped into the old tongue. Her accent was cracked and country and clumsy with disuse, and it was the most tender sound Wenna had ever heard in her life. Asterisk. Do not speak the last word of the speaking, whatever it costs you. Whatever they swear it will save. Asterisk. Her eyes were wet and fierce and old. Asterisk. The last word is not a key, child. The last word is a door. And of everyone who has ever lived, you are the only one left small enough to walk through it. Asterisk. What does that mean? Wenna whispered, in the same tongue, and felt the words fit her mouth like they'd been waiting there her whole life. Marin. What happens to me if I speak the last word? But the door swung open, and the cold came in ahead of him, and the king was standing in it, filling it, and whatever answer Marin had was swallowed whole. They rode for 2 days to reach the keep, and Wenna spent the whole of it learning the men who had come for her. She rode double behind a silent young guard the first day, her wrists unbound, which she understood was another of those kindnesses that changed nothing. There was nowhere to run to. The road ran through country, going quiet by degrees, and she could read it now, the way she read a room, the way she read the frost. The first village they passed through was ordinary, loud with market noise. The second was hushed, the people moving slow, a woman standing in a doorway, with her mouth working around a word she could no longer find. By the third, the doors stood open to the cold, and no one came out at all, and the guards did not slow, and no one spoke of it, and Wenna understood she was riding up the throat of the thing itself, toward the place where it was swallowing hardest. Ashen rode beside her on the second day, and he talked, which she had not expected, not to interrogate her, just to fill the gray miles. He told her, without being asked, that he had been the king's beta for 9 years, since before the mountain campaigns, since before whatever it was that had broken the man's sleep. He told her that Kalis had been different once, louder, quicker to laugh if you could believe it, of the man who had barred the tavern door. The war took the laughing, Ashen said, watching the ruined road, and the sleeplessness took the rest, one night at a time. I have watched him grind himself to powder, holding this up. Whatever you decide, girl, when we get where we are going, I would have you decide it, knowing he is not a monster. He is only a man who ran out of good choices a long way back and kept walking anyway. You love him, Wenna said. Not an accusation, an observation. Ossian was quiet a while. He is my king, he said at last, which was not a denial, and they left it there. That night, camped in the lee of a dead village, She caught the king watching her across the fire, not pricing her. Just watching, the way he had in the tavern after she spoke, as though she were a word he could almost read, and could not quite. She held his gaze until he looked away first, and told herself the small hot flare of satisfaction in her chest meant nothing at all. Igaehe did not look like the seed of a dying kingdom until you noticed the frost. It clung to the inner walls of the great hall in the deep of summer, feathering up the black stone in delicate patterns far too regular to be any natural rhyme. Patterns, Wenna realized as the guards walked her past them through the vaulting cold, that were almost letters, almost words. Her eye kept trying to read them and kept sliding off, the way your tongue keeps finding a missing tooth. The nearer they brought her to the heart of the keep, the thicker the frost grew, and the stranger the servants became. They were present. They were working, carrying, sweeping, doing. And they were somehow not entirely their asterisk behind their own eyes, like people performing from memory the last task they could still remember how to do, their faces smooth and calm and terribly empty. The silence was not a story the border told its children. The silence was here in the walls of the king's own house, climbing toward his own throat, one frozen letter at a time. They brought her at last to a round room with no windows, buried in the keep's cold stone heart, where the frost was worst of all, thick as fur on every surface. And there a stooped old man in ink-stained robes turned from a wall of shelved slate and nearly dropped his candle at the sight of her. This was Alder Voss, the lore-master of Draveth, and he looked at Wenna the exact way a starving man looks at a loaf he cannot yet let himself believe is real for fear of the fall when it turns out to be painted on. "It is a trick," he said to the king, even as he shuffled helplessly toward her, drawn against his own words. "A border charlatan who memorized one clever phrase to fleece a credulous rider. Your Majesty, I beg you, I have chased down 100 such rumors in 40 years, and every last one of them." He stopped, an arm's length from her. His hands were shaking so badly, the candle flame guttered. He held up a fragment of gray slate, its surface carved with marks that made Wenna's eyes ache and something far behind her breastbone ache worse, and he said, in the plain tongue, very low, as though afraid of his own hope, "Read it, if you can. Only the first line, only that." Wenna looked at the stone. Asterisk, down. Stay down. Be no one. Asterisk. The words were not those, of course, but that was the shape her whole life made when it fell across the ancient script, and for one vertiginous moment the carved slate and Marin's lullaby and the whispering dark all said the same single thing to her. She looked up and found the king watching her from across the round cold room, not pricing her now, not weighing her cost. Just watching, with an intensity stripped clean of the tavern's lazy amusement, a man watching the one card he has left being turned face up. And when a thought of the frost climbing these walls, and the village upstream, sitting silent in its open houses, and Marin's cracked and fearful voice in the storeroom, and 11 long years spent making herself into a water stain, while the world went quiet one town at a time, and no one sang to stop it. She read the stone aloud, in the true dialect. Alder Voss made a sound like a man struck hard in the chest, and sat straight down on the frozen floor, his robes pooling around him. Asterisk. It is the ward song. Asterisk, he breathed, staring up at her, and without seeming to notice he had done it, he switched into his own laborious, bookish old tongue, the words falling out of him half-formed. The renewal of the binding. The words we have not been able to truly sing since the last of the Ilvari were asterisk. He stopped. His roomy old eyes flicked, just once, quick and guilty as a thief's, toward the king. Asterisks. Since the Ilvari were lost asterisks. Lost asterisked. Wenna thought. Asterisked. That is a very careful word. Asterisked. And somewhere deep beneath her breastbone, another old buried thing rolled over in its long sleep. "Lawmaster," the king said quietly, into the cold. "Get up off the floor and tell her what she is." Alder Voss climbed to his feet, with one hand against the shelf of slate, and he would not meet Wenna's eyes now. He had met them for the reading. He would not meet them for the telling. The binding is a ward, he said. Not a wall of stone, but a wall of sound, sung once around the whole of Draveth, coast to border, older than the crown itself, older than the Varn name. It holds back the silence, the hollowing, the slow theft of voice, then memory, then name, then the very self, until what is left sits down in an open house and forgets it was ever a person. His throat worked around the shape of the next part. But a word that is sung must be asterisk, resung, asterisk. Once in a generation, in the true living voice of the people who first raised it out of the dark. The Ilvari, he drew a shaking breath, and the binding has not been renewed in 80 years. It is failing, it has been failing, my whole life. The border towns going quiet are not the disease, girl. They are the first symptom. In a year, perhaps, far less, the silence reaches this hall, then the capital, and then there is no one left anywhere in the world who so much as remembers that a kingdom called Draveth ever drew breath. Behind him, the frost ticked and crept another finger's width across the black stone. And the Ilvori are gone, Wenna said. Her voice came out level, which surprised her, given how the room was tilting. All of them, every one, so there is no true voice left in the world to sing your song. For the first time, Kalis Farn crossed the room to her himself. Close up he was even larger than the fire, and the hood had made him, and the exhaustion carved beneath his gray eyes was not the ordinary tiredness of a hard day, but the deep structural exhaustion of a man who has been holding a collapsing roof up with his bare hands for so long he has forgotten his arms could ever do anything else. And when he spoke, his voice was almost gentle, and that gentleness frightened her far more than the barred tavern door had. Because a cruel king she understood, but a gentle one who needed something from her was a puzzle with a blade hidden in it. There is one, the king said. You walked out of the border dark 11 years ago, a silent child speaking a tongue that no living soul on this earth could have taught you. There is only one thing you can be, and the lore master's face, when you read that stone, has told me I am right. His gray eyes searched hers, and there was something almost like grief in them, or apology, or both. You are the true voice, Wenna. You are the last of the Ilvari, and you are going to sing my dying kingdom back into life. Or you are going to stand here and watch it go silent along with everyone left breathing in it, yourself among them. Asterisk, do not speak the last word. Asterisk, Marin had said, in that cracked and tender tongue, only that morning. And you are the only one, small enough to walk through it. Asterisk. Wenna looked up into the face of the king who had hours ago called her a mouse, who would forget her own name. And she heard herself ask, very softly, the one question that would go on to unmake them both. And what happens, she said, to the one who sings it? The king said nothing. But behind him, Alder Voss turned his ink-stained face away toward the frozen shelves, and in that turning away, Wenna saw, with a cold that owed nothing at all to the frost on the walls, that the old lore master already knew the answer, that he had known it for 40 years, and that it was the kind of answer no one who had ever heard it had lived very long after. They gave Wenna a room with a lock on the inside, which she understood at once was meant to look like a kindness, and which fooled neither of them for a heartbeat. A lock on the inside keeps out what is in the corridor. It does nothing at all about the fact that you are not permitted to leave. It was the finest room she had ever slept in, hung with faded tapestries and warmed by a hearth laid ready, and the frost had found it too. She lay awake her first night in Varn Keep and watched the pale rime feathers slowly along the ceiling beam directly above her, and she counted the letters in it because she could read them now. She had stopped pretending, even to herself, that she could not, and the horror of it, The thing that kept her rigid and sleepless in that fine, soft bed was that the letters spelled nothing, nothing at all. The silence was not writing words onto the world, it was asterisk, unwriting asterisk, them. It was reaching into the shapes of language and pulling them apart stroke by patient stroke, and the frost was only the place where the eye could catch it happening, the way breath makes the wind visible for a moment before it's gone. She did not sing. She would not sing. She held Marin's warning clenched between her teeth like a stone against the current, and she said nothing that mattered to anyone. And in the morning they sent Alder Voss to change her mind. He came without guards, which she noted, and with an armful of slate fragments and a low wooden stool and the wary, guarded hopefulness of a man who has, against all his own hard-won judgment, decided that he might like someone. He did not beg. She had braced herself all night for begging, had built her walls to hold against it. Instead, the old lore master lowered himself onto the stool with a grunt and laid the slate out on the floor between them, one piece at a time, carefully, the way a man lays out his dead for washing, and he said, "I am going to teach you your own history, girl. Because you have been robbed of it, root and branch. And that is a crime, whatever else in this wretched business turns out to be true. And when I am done, you will decide whatever it is you decide. And I will not say another word to move you." So he taught her. And this was the part that Wenna had not braced for, the part she had not known to build a wall against, because you cannot wall out a blow you do not know is coming. The Ilvery had not been lost. The Ilvery had been spent. 80 years ago, Voss told her, his old voice flat and steady with the effort of not flinching, when the silence first began to press hard against the wards, and the border first began to thin, the crown of Dravith had gone to the Ilvery. The king then had been this king's own grandsire. The Ilvari were a small, quiet, unwarlike people who kept the binding as their sacred charge, who sang it, once a generation, as their forebears had, and asked nothing of the kingdom but to be let alone to do it. And the grandsire king had asked them, in the kingdom's dire need, to sing the renewal early, and hard, and often, to pour out their song again and again, generation upon generation, to bide Dravith time against the rising dark. And singing the binding cost the singer. That was the thing the histories had been left to rot to hide. Every renewal took something, not all at once, a little each time. First the voice roughened and then failed. Then the memories began to thin and drift. The oldest first, childhood going like smoke. Then the name. Then, at the last, the self, the whole person hollowed out as neatly and completely as any village. The silence took by its own slow hand. The Ilvery had known this. Of course they had known. They had sung anyway. Generation after generation, without monument, without thanks, without so much as a line in the histories, they had walked up to the singing knowing what it would take from them, and they had opened their mouths, until at last there were too few of them left to raise the song at all. And the final handful, rather than be gathered up and used down to the last child like a purse emptied of its last coin, had walked out into the border dark on their own feet. Which was not. Wenna understood now. The tragedy, the word lost asterisk, had been chosen to suggest. It was the only choice they had been left. It was the last free thing they ever did. Your people were not killed by the silence, Alder Voss said, and he could not look at her, and his old hands were shaking on his knees. They were fed to the wards, one at a time, to keep the rest of us talking. And the crown let the true histories rot in the dark on purpose, buried them under a careful, gentle word, so that no king who came after, and no subject who lived safe behind that song, would ever have to say aloud what it is that Dravith is built upon. He touched one gray slate with a single ink-stained finger, very lightly, as if it might burn. You asked me in this room, what happens to the one who sings? Now you understand why not one of us would give you an answer. Wenna sat very still on the edge of the fine bed. Outside the shuttered window, a bird was singing, ordinary and oblivious, and it seemed to be coming from very far away, from some other and kinder world. She thought of Marin's rough hand pressed gently over her small mouth in the dark. Asterisk. There are locks that should never be turned. You have a mouthful of keys. Asterisk. And she understood, all at once and completely, that she had spent 11 years with the meaning of it exactly backward. Marin had not been protecting the frightened world from the dangerous child. Marin had been protecting the child from the world that would spend her. Get out, Wenna said quietly, not cruelly. There was no cruelty left anywhere in her. She simply had no room in her chest for another living person just then, not even a kind one. Please. Alder Voss gathered his slate back into his arms, slow and careful, and rose and shuffled to the door. And there he paused, and Wenna thought for one unbearable moment that he was going to apologize, which she could not have survived. She braced for it, the way she'd braced for the begging. He did not apologize. What he said instead was worse. He does not know. The Lore Master said. To the door, not turning around. The king, he does not know how the Ilvori truly ended. The walking into the dark, the crown's long hand in all of it. His grandsire buried it deep, and his father died, never having learned it. And I have been for 40 years the only living soul who can read the true histories well enough to know. His gray head bowed. He believes he is asking a miracle of you. He does not know that he is asking of you the exact same thing his family asked of yours, and called it duty, and let it rot. I have not yet decided whether telling him would help you or doom you. But I find I cannot let you walk into this, believing you are the only one in the room holding a secret. At last he looked back at her, over his shoulder, his eyes wet and old and unbearably tired. I thought you should know that I know. In case, girl, you should ever want to use it. And he opened the door and went, and it shut behind him, with a soft, final click. Wenna sat alone and looked up at the frost, patiently unwriting the world above her head. And for the first time since the moment she had opened her mouth in the iron kettle, she felt something other than fear moving in her chest. It was cold, and it was clean, and it was almost calm. It was the weight of a card that no one else at this table knew she was holding. The king came himself on the fourth night, which surprised her, and he came alone, without his beta a step behind him, which surprised her a great deal more. She heard him before he knocked, not his footsteps. She had learned already that he moved through the keep, silent as weather. That terrible economy again. What she heard was the frost. It asterisk drew back asterisk from the door as he approached down the corridor, retreating up the stone in a slow, dry crackle like ice giving on a spring pond. And Wenna sat up in the dark and watched a clean patch of black stone bloom and spread on the wall where the king now stood on the far side of the wood. And she thought, asterisk the wards still know their own blood. Even starving, even failing, they lean toward the crown that has fed on them. Asterisk, you are not asleep, he said through the door. It was not a question. Neither are you, your majesty, she answered. The whole keep hears you not sleeping. It's practically the only sound in the place. A pause on the other side of the wood. She had surprised him back. Then the lock turned. The lock on asterisk, her asterisk side, the one that was meant to be her small kindness, because of course the king of the keep had a key to every kindness in it. And Kalis Viharn stepped in, and shut the door, and stood a careful, deliberate distance from her, with his hands clasped behind his back, like a man paying respects at a shrine to a god he is no longer certain he believes in. Up close and unguarded, and lit only by the low hearth, he looked far less like a king, and far more like the hollowed servants she had passed in the corridors, save for one thing. He was still fighting it, and they had all long since stopped. There were deep, bruised hollows beneath the gray eyes. When he was not using it to price a room, his voice came lower and rougher than she had braced for, and it did something to the back of her neck that she resented with her whole heart. Lo, Master Voss tells me you have stopped speaking to him, the king said, Low Master Voss taught me what your family did to mine, Wenna said, and then, in the same breath, asked me to volunteer for it. I found I had run rather short of conversation. She watched that strike home, and to his credit, which she had not expected him to possess any of, he did not flinch away from it, and he did not reach for a comfortable lie to lay over it. He stood and took the weight of it. He was quiet, a long moment, and the frost ticked and settled on the far wall. And then, he said a thing that pulled loose a stitch in her she had sworn to keep sewn tight. I know that what I am asking cost you, Kalis said. I do not know the full shape of the cost. Voss guards those stones like a dragon on gold, and I have never been able to read them for myself. But I have watched 16 border towns go quiet in 3 years. I rode into the square at Ashcombe last spring, and a child I had bounced on my own knee at her naming looked up into my face and had no word left in her for *King*, nor for *frightened*, nor for *mothers, though her mother was standing 3 feet from her weeping. His jaw worked once hard. So I know exactly what I am. I am a man standing in a serving girl's borrowed room, asking her to burn herself down to the wick to save the lives of people who will never know her name. I am not going to stand here and insult us both by pretending it is anything cleaner than that. Curse him, Wenna thought, with something close to despair. Curse him for being honest about it. It was so much easier when he was cold. Then why ask at all, she said, if you already know what it is you're asking? Because the alternative, he said simply, is that everyone goes silent, including you. The silence does not spare the ones who refuse to fight it, Wenna. It does not reward the careful and the quiet. It simply takes them last, and takes them in their sleep, and they never even know to be afraid. He met her eyes across the firelit dark. I would rather you had a terrible choice than that you had no choice at all. It is the only mercy I have left to offer anyone, and I am well aware that it is not truly one. And there it was. The thing that made this man dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with the wolf coiled under his skin. He did not beg her. He did not threaten her. He laid the whole terrible truth of it down into her open hands and let it be as heavy as it was, and trusted her to carry it, and that trust was a hook set deeper than any threat could have gone. Tell me one thing, Your Majesty, Wenna said slowly, turning it over. In the tavern, you called me a mouse who would go on being silent long after the silence took her tongue. She tilted her head and watched his face. Did you know? Somehow what I was. For the first time, since he had entered, Kalis Farn looked away from her. No, he said, to the fire, but something in me did. He had drifted to the door now, and he stopped there, with one broad hand flat against the frame, and the frost curled visibly back from his fingers where they touched the stone. I have spoken the old tongue since before I could walk upright. It has always been a dead thing in my mouth. Cold ash, tasting of the schoolroom and my father's schoolroom cane. And then you answered me across a filthy border tavern, in a voice that made the words sound alive for the first time in my whole life, and he stopped, started again, lower almost to himself. I have not slept a full night through in 3 years. Every remedy, the healer's own, every tea ocean brews. My own stubborn alpha blood, that is supposed to mend anything, none of it. And I stood in that doorway just now, listening to you refuse to sleep through a locked door, and the frost pulled back from my hand, and for about 10 heartbeats, girl, his voice went very quiet for about 10 heartbeats. The silence that came after that was a wholly different silence than the one eating his kingdom alive. This one was full. Good night, Wenna, the king said. And he was gone before she could find a single word in any tongue, living or dead, to give him back. She lay down again in the dark. The frost did not creep back to the wall beside the door for a very long time. It seemed reluctant, as though the memory of him lingered there and held it off. And Wenna pressed her own hand, flat, against the center of her own chest, where something had begun, very faintly, to pull, a thread drawn slowly taut. A line running out from behind her breastbone and away down a frozen corridor, toward a door she should not be thinking about. And she thought, with a fear entirely unlike any the silence had ever put in her, "Ow no. No. Not that. Anything in the world but that, and not. Of all the souls alive. With him. After that." The nights had a shape, neither of them ever named the shape, and both of them quietly arranged the whole of their days around, protecting it. The king would come when the keep had gone to sleep, around them, never with Ossian, never with Voss. Just the retreating frost and the turned lock, and Kalis Varn folding his enormous frame down into the chair beside her cold hearth, like a man at last setting down a weight he has carried so long he'd forgotten it could be set down at all. And Wenna, who had spent 11 years making certain that no living person ever truly heard her, discovered that she could not seem to stop talking to him. She told him about the iron kettle, about Dell and his one clean spot on the bar, about Marin burying 3 husbands, dry-eyed, and then walking into the border dark, for a mute foundling anyway, and never once explaining why beyond you were there to be carried. About the trapper who had tipped her a whole fox pelt one winter, worth more than a month of her wages, because she had remembered unasked that he took no salt in his stew, small things, nothing that mattered to a king. And the king, who by every account in the realm had not truly slept in 3 years, would go still and quiet in the chair as she talked, and his great shoulders would come slowly down from around his ears, and his breathing would lengthen and slow. And one night, she looked over in the middle of a sentence, and Kalis Harn, Altha of Dravith, the man who had silenced 6 hard riders in a border tavern without lifting his voice, was fast asleep, sitting upright in the chair, with the frost melting off the stone all around him in a widening ring of clean, warm black. She should have been frightened. Instead, she rose slow and silent, and pulled the good blanket off her own fine bed and laid it over him, and then she sat back down. And she kept talking, softer now, and in the old tongue, just to feel the living words move through the warm air of the room, just to give the ring of clean stone something to spread toward, and it did spread. Wider and wider until it reached the very door. He woke before dawn every single time, always with a start, always with a faint disbelieving flush, climbing his neck, that a man that size and that dangerous had no earthly business being capable of. And he never once thanked her for it in words. But the healer's teas stopped arriving at her door, and a second chair appeared beside the hearth, one that was unmistakably and without a word said, a good deal more comfortable than the first. And one gray morning she woke to find a book left on her table. It was the Histories. Voss's fiercely guarded slate, copied out fair and full in a careful, laborious hand, in the plain common tongue, so that she could read the true story of her own vanished people, without the old lore master standing over her shoulder to watch her learn how they had died. She knew the hand, she had seen it in the margins of the copied histories themselves. The king had copied it out for her himself, letter by letter, in a script that turned clumsy and cramped over the harder passages, the way a man's hand does at the end of a very long night. He is learning it. She thought, turning the pages with careful fingers, her chest doing something complicated and entirely unwelcome. So he is learning my history, the long, slow way, copying it by hand in the dark, so that when I finally read it, I will not have to be alone in it. The pull behind her breastbone was not faint anymore. She knew what it was. She had grown up among wolves. Even if she was no wolf herself, you cannot spend a life in a border town and not learn the shape of the thing. She knew a forming mate bond, the way you know a word in a language you do not speak. Not by its meaning, but by its edges, by the space it makes in the air, around it. And it was not supposed to be possible. Bonds were for wolves. For the named and the blooded and the belonging, not for a foundling who had been taught before she could remember to be no one, to want nothing, to take up no room. And certainly not, stretched taut and singing between a nameless serving girl and the king whose own family had spent her people like coin from a purse. She told herself firmly that it was only the wards. Some artifact of the failing binding, some resonance between the last living Ilvery and the crown, that the song had always leaned toward. She told herself this firmly and often, and did not believe it for a single breath. And then, on the 9th night, Ossian was waiting in her room when she came up from the kitchens with the day's last errand done, and the careful shape of the nights broke open. He did not sit. He stood beside the cold hearth, with the king's good chair set conspicuously in the space between them, and his sharp face held no cruelty in it at all, which she had learned by now was the thing to dread most from this man. "He sleeps," Ossian said, without preamble. "For the first time in 3 years, my king sleeps a night through. The whole keep has marked it. He is sharper in counsel, steadier on his feet. He handed down a judgment yesterday that was, heaven help us, almost merciful. A thin, tired smile touched his mouth and left it. You have done in 9 nights what every healer and hedge witch and holy fool in Dravith failed to do in 3 years. And so I am the man whose thankless task it is to sit up nights and think very hard about. Why? I don't know why, Wenna said. Which was true. Mostly, I think you do. Ossian studied her, unhurried. I think there is a bond forming between you. I think that is why the frost kneels away from your door, the way it has only ever knelt for the blood of the crown. And I think, he paused, and for the first time since the iron kettle storeroom, she saw clearly that he was not threatening her at all. He was afraid, and it sat strangely on him. I think you had best understand precisely what that means, before your heart carries you any further into this than it very plainly already has. And what does it mean, my lord? Her voice came out steadier than the rest of her felt. It means the binding will not take you cleanly. Ossian's jaw tightened. Voss finally, let me read the last of the stones, the end of them. The singer is hollowed out. Yes, you have grasped that much. But a asterisk bonded. Asterisk singer is not hollowed alone, girl. A bond is a rope. And when the silence takes hold of you and begins to drag you down into that dark, it will drag him down the rope right behind you. King and kingdom together. Every last thing you would open your mouth to save. He let that settle into the cold air between them. So, either you refuse and every soul in Dravith goes quiet within the year, yourself and your Marin among them. Or you sing, and in the singing, you drag the man you are falling in love with down into the dark at your heels. Wenna sat down slowly, in the king's good chair. There has to be another way, she said. Break the bond. Cut it, before I ever sing. If it's a rope, then pull it apart. You cannot cut a mate bond, Wenna? Ossian moved toward the door. You, of all people alive, should feel that in your own chest. It does not cut. You can only refuse to finish. It. He looked back at her from the doorway, and his voice had gone almost gentle, which was the very worst thing it had done all night. So do not finish it. Whatever has begun between the two of you, let it starve. Starve it out. It is the only mercy left in this whole miserable business for either one of you. He opened the door onto the frozen corridor. He does not know yet about the rope. I will leave it to you to decide whether you would rather be the one who tells him or the one who lets him find out for himself when it is far too late for the knowing to matter. The door shut, and Wenna sat alone in the king's good chair, in the wide ring of clean black stone that his sleeping had cleared, and watched the frost begin, very quietly, very patiently, to creep back in toward her, from all 4 corners of the room, reaching for her feet. She let it starve for 6 days. It was the cruelest thing Wenna had ever done to herself or to anyone else, and she did it perfectly, because 11 years had made her a master of exactly one art, and that art was the swallowing of things that wanted out. When the frost drew back from her door at midnight, she did not open it. When the king's low voice came through the wood, only her name, only that, Wenna, quiet and uncertain in a way a king's voice should never be, she pressed her spine flat to the far wall and jammed her own fist against her own mouth and made no sound at all, and listened to him stand out there in the cold corridor for long minutes until, at last, each night he went away, and the pull behind her breastbone screamed the whole while, a rope hauled to the edge of snapping, and she held it, and told herself over and over that this was love, that the refusing was the love, that this starving was the only shape love had been left room to take in a world like theirs. The king did not sleep those 6 days. She heard it move through the keep like weather. A judgment gone hard and cold again where it had lately been merciful, a servant flinching back from a doorway, the frost climbing back down her own walls to the places it had been driven from. And on the 6th night the pull did not scream. It went asterisk, weak asterisk, a thread fraying toward nothing, thinning, and Wenna understood with a lurch of pure animal terror that starving the bond did not merely hurt. Both of them, slowly and quietly, and from the inside, in exactly the way the silence killed, not with any violence at all, but with absence, with the patient withdrawal of the single living thing that had come to matter. She was on her knees on the cold hearthstones, shaking both hands pressed over her chest, as though she could hold the fraying thread together by force, when the door opened without a knock. Calus had not slept in 6 days, and it showed on him like a wound gone bad. But it was not exhaustion in his face now. It was fury, white and shaking, and underneath the fury, cracked wide open where anyone could see it, was something that had no armor left on it at all. Ossian told me, he said, tonight, finally, what the bond does. He crossed the room in 3 strides and dropped to his knees on the stone in front of her, which no king in the history of the world should ever do, which undid her completely and at once. 6 days. 6 days I have lain awake telling myself I had done something, that I had frightened you off, that you had finally seen clearly what my family is, what I am, and could not stand another hour in the same keep as the sight of me. And the whole time you were, his voice broke clean in half, you were trying to save me, by starving yourself, where I could not see it and could not stop you. It is the only way that does not end with you in the dark beside me, Wenna said, and her own voice was breaking now too. If I finish the bond, Calus, and then I sing, the rope drags you down after me, all of you. The kingdom, the crown, everything, I will not. I, will not, Do you hear me? Then do not sing, he said, fierce and low, and let every soul in Draveth go quiet. Let that child in Ashcombe forget her own mother's face. I do not care about the child in Ashcombe. It tore out of him raw and appalling, and utterly honest, echoing off the bare stone, and then he flinched hard at his own words, because it was a lie, and it was the truest thing he had ever said, both at once. He did care. He had built his entire ruined self around the caring. The caring was the whole of what was killing him, and that was precisely why it undid him. To have said it aloud, heaven, he pressed the heels of both hands hard against his eyes. I do care. That is the trap of the entire thing. I have spent 3 years being the man who spends people to save people. I am my grandsire, wearing a kinder face. I am the very thing the lore master will not say to me directly. And the one time in my life, one asterisk time, that the person I would have to spend is the one that he stopped. The frost had gone utterly still on every wall of the room, poised, listening. The half-starved rope between them pulled so hard and so suddenly that Wenna felt it ring in her teeth, like a struck bell. "Say it in the old tongue," she whispered. "The true dialect, the living one. Say it. So it's asterisk alive, asterisk, when you say it." And the king, who had spoken the ancient words like cold ash every day of his life since before he could walk, said the three words that mattered most. And they came out, asterisk alive asterisk, clumsy in his mouth, accented all wrong, the vowels in the wrong places, a schoolboy's mangled grammar, and utterly, undeniably, unmistakably living. And the frost fell off the walls of the room all at once, sheeting down the black stone to the floor like a snake shedding a skin it had long outgrown, and the pull between them snapped in the same instant from a fraying gray thread into a rope of pure, singing gold. "Then we do not finish it," Wenna said, even as her own hands were already reaching for him, betraying every word. "We don't. We stay right here, at the very edge of it. And we do not," he agreed, and kissed her. And neither one of them meant a single word of it. She had been told her whole life to be no one, to take up no room in the world, to let herself go quietly hungry so that others might be full and never notice the cost. And here now was a king on his knees on cold stone, a man who had ridden to the ragged end of the world spending lives like coins from a purse, and the two of them wrapped around each other in a room stripped bare and warm of frost, each one desperately, wordlessly trying to be the one who burned so the other would not have to. They did not finish the bond. They came to the very lip of that golden edge and stopped there, foreheads pressed together, breathing each other's breath in the firelit dark, the rope singing bright and whole between them. And it was enough to leave them both wrecked and shaking. And it was not, and they both knew it in their bones, going to be enough to hold for very much longer. Afterward, tangled together in the fine borrowed blankets, Kalis slept. Deep and clean and easy, without a single retreat of frost, because there was no frost left anywhere in the room for his sleeping to drive back. Wenna did not sleep. She lay in the circle of his heavy arm, her cheek over the slow, strong drum of his heart, and watched the honest black stone of the ceiling, and did at last the arithmetic she had been running from for 9 days. The bond, unfinished, held back from its last step, was already this strong, already golden, already she was now certain, a rope grown thick enough to drag a king down into the dark, and the silence was still coming. It had not paused for their one warm night. Somewhere out past the failing wards, 16 silent towns sat with their doors standing open to the wind. Asterisk, you can only refuse to finish it, asterisk, Ossian had said. But that was a lie, or at best, a half-truth, in the way that every single thing in this kingdom was a half-truth, buried carefully to keep the powerful comfortable in their beds. There was another way. She had read it herself, 3 nights past in the king's own careful, cramped hand. In the histories he had sat up copying in the dark, so that she would not have to learn her people's death alone. She had read it, and read past it, and not let herself understand it. But she understood it now, here, with his heartbeat steady under her cheek, and a rope of gold running warm through the center of her chest. "The last word is a door, asterisk," Marin had said, on the last morning of the old life, asterisk, and you are the only one small enough to walk through it. Very gently, so as not to wake him. Wenna eased herself out from under the sleeping king's arm. She sang before dawn, alone, in the round windowless room at the frozen heart of the keep, where Voss kept the stones of her dead. She had woken the old lore-master first, and brought him down with her, because someone had to witness it, someone had to asterisk remember, and he was the last soul left in all of Dravith who could. And when he had understood, standing there in his nightshirt, with a candle shaking in his hand, what she had worked out in the dark, what she meant to do, and why, Alder Voss had wept. Openly without shame. The way she suspected he had wanted to weep for 40 years over stones he could read and could not save anyone with. And then, because she asked it of him, gently, he had steadied himself. He had read the word song out once in his laborious, bookish dialect, so that she would have the full shape of it clear in her mind. And then he had fallen silent, and folded his hands, so that hers would be the only living voice in the room, when it began, because that was the thing the crown had never once understood. The thing that 80 years of spending the Ilvari-like coin had missed entirely, had never even thought to look for. The binding did not have to hollow the singer. It hollowed them because they sang it afraid. Because they sang it as a sacrifice, as a thing torn, bleeding out of themselves against the whole desperate pull of everyone and everything they were being made to leave behind. And the silence fed on that. It fed on the grief of the giving, on the terror and the loss, and it grew fat on it. Every generation of Ilvari before her had walked up to that song, believing to their marrow that they were being spent, that they were coin, that this was the cost of them and the whole worth of them. And the belief itself had been the knife. The belief had done the hollowing, the song had only opened the door. Wenna did not sing it as a sacrifice. She had worked it out in the dark with the king's heart beating under her cheek, and the golden rope singing warm between them. She was not no one. She was not coin to be spent so that others could be full. Marin had walked into the border dark for a mute foundling, not to use her, but because the child was worth the walking, worth the risk of the dark, worth carrying back out into the light. You were there to be carried. The Ilvari had never been coin. They had been a people who loved a place and its living voices, enough to hold the whole of it up on their song, generation after generation. And they had been told they were coin, told it so long and so well that they came to believe it and sing it and die of it. And the telling, Wenna understood now, standing in the cold with her dead all around her in gray slate, the telling had been the entire crime. So she sang, the binding the way you sing to someone you fully intend to come back to. She sang it in the true dialect, the living one, the one that had cracked out of her across a filthy tavern and turned a king's head, like a mountain turning. And where every Ilvari before her had reached the last word and let it hollow them out, had walked through the door and simply not come back. Wenna reached the last word and understood, at last, in her whole body, what Marin had meant on that final morning. The last word is a door, not a death. Not an ending, a door, and a door can be walked through and walked back, both ways. If and only if the one walking through it has somewhere on the other side that she absolutely refuses not to return to. She had a rope of gold tying her to a king, asleep in a warm bare room 3 floors above. She had an old woman in a border tavern who had buried 3 husbands dry-eyed and then wept, at last, for a foundling. She had, for the first time in the whole of her erased and swallowed life, a reason to come back that belonged to no one but herself. Wenna spoke the last word. The door opened. And the fog took her, as she had known it would, the hollow gray place, the unwriting nothing, where the silence lived and where every spent Ilvari before her had thinned away to less than a name. She stood in it and felt it reach for her at once, reach for her voice and her memory and her name, and her very self felt it begin to pull the strokes off her, one at a time the way it pulled them off the whole waiting world. Down it whispered to her, and it whispered in her own small remembered voice. The child's voice from before the finding, stay down, be no one, it is easier, it has always been easier. It is what you are for, and down the golden rope, from very far away, 3 floors up, in a room with no frost left in it, a king woke reaching in his sleep for someone who was no longer there, and felt the empty blankets, and understood. And pulled not the way that Ossian had feared. That was the thing, none of them, not Voss, not Ossian, Not 80 years of frightened kings had ever been in a position to learn, because it had never once been sung this way before. The rope did not drag the king down into the dark behind her. Wenna had sung the song too whole for that, had sung it as a homecoming and not a leaving, and so when Kalis woke and felt her gone and hauled on the bond with the full desperate strength of an alpha of Dravith, the golden rope held fast, and it pulled the *right way. And it gave her the one single thing that no Ilvori in 80 years of walking into that fog had ever carried in there with them. Something to come back to. I am not no one. Wenna told the silence. In the living tongue, and the words landed in the gray, like struck iron, like a hammer on an anvil, ringing. Marin gave it to me on the wrong side of your wards, in the cold, when I had nothing else in the world, and I have carried it 11 years. I have a place. I have a man 3 floors up, reaching for me down a rope of gold with everything he has. You do not get to unwrite me. You have unwritten your last. I am the last living daughter of the Ilvari, and I am going home, and she spoke her own name into the heart of the hollow. And the fog, which had swallowed a whole gentle, patient people for 80 years, because they had each walked into it already believing they deserved to be swallowed, could not hold on to someone who knew, all the way to the floor of herself, that she did not. It tore. Light came pouring in through the ripping gray, the way dawn comes through a flung-open shutter, and the words came flooding back onto the world, strokes reassembling, names re-inking themselves onto everything that had a name. And Wenna turned, and followed the rope of gold, hand over hand, and walked back out through the door she had opened. And behind her, around her, above her, the binding sang itself whole and new and living around the entire breadth of Dravith, coast to border, in the true living voice it had been starving for, across 80 silent years. She came back to herself, on the floor of the round room. Aldervoss was on his knees beside her, sobbing, saying her name, over and over and over. Her name! And she still had it, she could hear it. It was still hers. And behind him, the black stone walls stood bare and clean and warm. No frost, no creeping unwriting, nothing at all now but honest gray morning, beginning to seep in through the keep from a whole kingdom that was going to wake in an hour remembering every last word it had ever known. And then the round room's door burst clean off its hinges, and Kalisvarn was across the floor and down on it, with her gathered up into his arms, shaking hard, his face pressed into her hair, saying her name into it in the old tongue over and over. Alive, 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 alive. You walked into the dark alone, and you did not wake me, you did not tell me. I had somewhere to come back to, Wenna said into his chest. I have never once had that before, Kalis, in my whole life. And it turns out that is the entire trick of it. That is the thing. Your family never once gave mine. She pulled back far enough to look up into his face, and she was crying, and she found she did not care in the least. 11 years of being furniture pouring hot down her cheeks all at once. You do not spend the people who hold the roof up. You never had to. You give them a reason to want, the roof standing over them, a name, and a place, and a rope of gold, and then they do not have to be spent at all. They will hold it up gladly. They only ever needed a way home. The king held the last daughter of the Ilvari there on the cold stone floor of the round room, while 3 floors above and all around them, his kingdom woke slowly into a bright ordinary morning. It would never once know it had very nearly lost forever. And for the first time in 3 years, in the plain living common tongue, with no frost anywhere left to hear him, Kalisvarn wept. The frost did not all leave at once, because nothing in the world worth trusting ever arrives all at once. For weeks after, Wenna would still wake in the gray hour, with the cold taste of the hollow in the back of her mouth, certain for one terrible held breath that she had lost a word in the night. Lantern. asterisk, bread asterisk, her own name. And she would lie rigid in the dark and count them carefully back to herself, one at a time, until she was sure again that they were all still there. And every time, before she had finished the counting, a heavy arm would draw her back in against a broad, warm chest, and Calus would murmur the words to her one by one in his terrible, clumsy schoolboy's accent, the vowels all wrong, until she was laughing at him and the fear had let go its grip. He was learning the true dialect. Badly. Gloriously, hopelessly, badly. She had privately resolved to make him fluent if it took the rest of both their lives, which, the healers now cautiously agreed, was likely to be a very long time indeed. The binding, renewed whole and living and unafraid, needed no more spending, no more coin, for a good long age. And the last daughter of the Ilvery fully intended not to remain the last for very much longer, a matter on which she had discovered she held a great many opinions. Marin came up to Viharn Keep for the wedding and refused on principle to be impressed by a single stone of the place and wept anyway, openly, dry-eyed no longer. The court did not in the least know what to make of a nameless foundling serving girl set up as their queen, and the whispers followed Wenna down every warm, frost-free corridor she walked. And Wenna, who had spent 11 years making certain that no living soul ever heard her speak, found to her own quiet astonishment that she no longer minded being heard at all. She had a mouthful of keys and a kingdom that finally, at long last, knew exactly what it owed to the quiet people who had held its roof up in the dark. She fully intended to say a very great deal, and to be heard saying it. They still went down to the round rooms sometimes, late, when the keep had gone to sleep around them, just to stand together in it a while. Just to feel the warm, bare, black stone under their hands where the frost had once spelled out its patient, endless, unwriting nothings. Say it again, Calus would ask her there, in the dark and the quiet, the very way he had asked it of her once, across a filthy border tavern on the night the whole world tilted off its edge, in the living tongue. And Wenna, no one's mouse, the last daughter of the Ilvari, queen of a kingdom that remembered its own name, would answer him perfectly, every word, and she would mean every single one.